Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about developing modules for e-learning activities. So we are doing this primarily because we are now in the process of migrating to e-learning exercises as a response to the COVID-19 crisis. And one of the expectations from you as practicumers is to develop a platform where you can conduct e-learning sessions or interventions using computer-mediated platforms. So for our discussion, we just have a few talking points. First, we will talk about what a module is, uh, how it is defined, and what are the characteristics of a module. Then we will also talk about considerations in developing a module, since you will later on be developing your own module for your interventions. We will talk about what are the things that you have to think about as you develop these modules. We will talk about the process of developing a module. What are the steps that you have to take when you develop modules on your own? The components that have to be present in the module that you will be developing, and specific and special discussion on effective learning objectives, since later on we will realize that an effective module always has effective objectives. So what is a module? A module is a set of standardized parts or independent units that can be used to construct a more complex structure. So the important element of this definition is that there are independent units, there are independent parts, but that these parts are structured in such a way that they help each other. So a module is also an instructional package dealing with a single conceptual unit of subject matter. So what makes a module different from a curriculum is that a module usually tackles very specific learning objectives. And the simpler the objectives that you want to tackle in a particular module, the better. A module is also designed to help students accomplish certain well-defined objectives. As I was discussing earlier, when you have specific objectives that are smart, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound, then usually it guides you towards developing a more effective module as well. And most importantly, a module can be individualized in such a way that the learners can go through the material at their own pace and at their own time. According to Terry Anderson, the learning process, particularly in open and distance learning, is characterized by the interaction among different educative processes: the student, the content, and the teacher. And that in the context of open and distance learning, the theory is that deep and meaningful formal learning is supported as long as one of the three forms of interaction, student-teacher interaction, student-student interaction, and the student-content interaction, is at high level. The other two may be offered at minimal levels or even eliminated without degrading the educational experience. So this is actually the framework upon which we are basing our attempt to try to offer e-learning activities and e-learning modules to our clienteles. So as you develop the module, you have to consider first, how would the module elicit interaction among students? Second, how the module would provide interaction between the student and the content. And in the context of e-learning activities, the content would be anything that you would post on the learning platform that you will be developing. And finally, you also have to consider the interaction that you will have to the participants in your e-learning activity, and the interaction of all these three important components. So what are other considerations in module development? First, you have to be clear about the module purposes and aspirations for participants and to be able to communicate these to them. So it has to be clear to you why in the first place you are trying to develop this module and what will be the change that this module would uh, let the participants undergo to. You make sure that your module is constructively aligned. So if you remember your discussion on the ubiquitous learning, one of the characteristics of open and distance education is that it is founded upon the constructivist philosophy, which means that in the process of learning, it is not only the teacher who creates materials, who creates content, but also the learner. And whatever content the learner creates usually uh, is all aligned with the kind of outcome that they also have for themselves. So the module should be able to provide an opportunity where the learner's outcomes, intended outcomes, align with the teacher's outcome. So you should also be able to provide not only the opportunities that you want to provide to achieve the goal of the module, but also provide an opportunity for the learner to achieve her or his own goal in the learning activity. And most importantly, considering the course in context. In the case of the e-learning module that you will create, this pertains to the developmental group that you are catering, which is, for instance, the youth group. So you have to consider what are the needs of this youth group who are online, such that the module that you will create will be able to gather their interest and also would be meaningful and beneficial for them. What are other things to think about? First, what are the type of course that you will develop? How long is the course? How many participants are you expecting? What are the academic level of these participants? And what type of students or participants you have? So for instance, if you would like to create a course on psychological well-being or enhancing psychological well-being among the adolescents, you have to think about the type of the course. Is this going to be a series of lectures? Is it going to be a material that participants can log on to or explore at their own time? Will this course have or engage participants to discussions between and among themselves? And also the type of language that you will use. Will you be using language which are more complex? Say, for example, when you are aiming at working with older youth, or are you going to use very simple language that are accessible and understandable even by those participants or online participants that are younger? Next is the resources available. So who would be involved in developing this module? Since you are a group of practicumers, then it is expected that each of you would take part in developing the modules. But you also have to clarify what are the roles that each of you would have. So what are the common roles? Some would probably be engaged in preparing the content. Others would be engaged in gathering the materials. Some of you might probably engage in developing the platform, which will be discussed in succeeding sessions. And others probably would be in charge of the facilitation of the actual e-learning experience. And you also have to consider the resources that the participants would have. Would they have access to the internet? How often do they access the internet? And also you. What kind of materials can you develop? What kind of content can you develop based on the resources and the competencies that you have? So are you capable of developing video presentations that you can upload? Are you capable of developing slide presentations that you can discuss in a platform like the one I am using now? Or you are more capable of gathering reading materials that can just be uploaded and read by the participants? And finally, you also have to consider the disciplinary context, the subject that you are going to tackle on through your module. And in the context of the practicum, you are expected to focus on human and family development studies and the related issues that pertain to the concerns of individuals across the lifespan and the issue of the Filipino family. So how do we develop modules? There are many ways on how we frame the process, but for the purpose of this discussion, we are looking at this 5-step process. First is that we have to clarify the aims and learning outcomes. What kind of change are you looking on for these participants to achieve? And clarify also, why would you like to look at this change? So for instance, if you would like to talk about sexual and reproductive health among the adolescents, what kind of change do you want to see? And why in the first place you think that this change is important? Then from the learning outcomes, you develop the course content. So this includes the materials that you're going to use and the actual academic content that these materials would contain. You explore the teaching methods and resources that you have, the kinds of platform that you will use, and how you will facilitate the platform. Then assessment. How do you measure that the change that you are trying to look at is already happening or has already happened? And finally, as you facilitate the module and use it, you monitor and review if it is working or not. And the cycle goes on. So one thing good about developing modules and implementing modules online is that it is usually very easy to monitor and adapt the module based on the emerging needs of the participants. So in the middle of the program, if in case you think that the module is not working and there are some tweaks that you have to make, then it is usually very easy for the facilitator, the module developer, to do that. So what are the components of a module? So these will be the components that you will have to ensure will be accessible in your module. First is the title, which shows the specific topic of the module. The title has to be clear, concise, and reflective. Then the module would have an overview, which is the scope and the rationale. The objectives, which has to be showing the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes that you want to teach. The activity, which is the actual structured learning experience, and it has to contain the time allotment, the materials that you are using and the participants would be needing, and the procedure that has to be followed. Then after the activity, the discussion, it is the process of the learning experience, wherein you ask questions and engage the participants into discussions. The input, which is the part where you give information and provide the learning content. The deepening, which is the application of the learning. So this can be another activity which the participants can do on their own. Then they would just have to give a feedback through your platform about what happened. And the synthesis, which is a summary and insights. So for example, if you are if the module that you will be developing will be live in a week, then at the end of the week, the participants should be able to share their insights from participating in the activity. And finally, the evaluation, or the measures and indicators of learning. Now let's focus on this particular framework wherein the learning objective as an essential element of a module is presented. So in simpler terms, what you can see from the image is that a learning experience should always have three main components. First is that it should possess an opportunity for the participants to gain cognitive knowledge. or these are knowledge that are declarative, which means that these are facts that they can discuss and share. It can also be procedural, which means that participants may be able to learn the how of doing something, what are the steps that they have to take to achieve something, and strategic, which means that for a particular need or issue, what are the things that they can do and how can they make effective decisions. So a learning experience should also be able to provide opportunities for skill-based learning, which includes skill to organize things, and eventually, as they practice the skill, they will be able to do this particular activity or skill automatically. And finally, the learning experience should have an attitudinal learning component, which tackles about the affect. So how does the learning content influence you as a person? How do you feel about it? And how does the reality being contained or being discussed in the learning experience important or relevant to you as a person? So for each learning objective component that we just discussed, it is always strategic and wise to develop simple but effective learning objective statements. And for the learning objectives, usually we have four main components of the statement that we will have to develop. So A is for the audience. So this pertains to the learners for whom the objective is written. So in your case, this would be the participants in your online module. B is behavior, which is a verb that describes what the audience will be able to do. And usually this is guided by Bloom's taxonomy of learning, which you can also research on your own. The verb is very important because this is what the participants are expected to perform, such as describe, explain, locate, synthesize, argue, or communicate. And this is also important because this is the skill that they will later on learn from the experience that your module will provide. Letter C is condition. This is the circumstances under which the audience will perform the behavior. So in most cases, the condition is that after being able to attend the learning experience that you provide, then they will be more comfortable and more confident to perform a particular skill or task. And finally is the degree, or the acceptable performance of the behavior. So this pertains to the how, and the how well particular learner would perform the behavior. So here is an example of a learning objective. So if you look at the condition, after viewing this video, the learners or the participants in this program should be able to discuss the purpose of module development concisely and correctly. So the objective has all of the components required. The audience, which is the learners who are participating in this lecture, the condition, the behavior, which is to discuss the module development process and purpose, and finally the degree, that they should be able to discuss it concisely but also correctly. So do you have any questions regarding the discussion? If you have questions, you can send me an email at nbbotor@up.edu.ph, or you can also post something just below this video so that I can respond to you accordingly. So on your own, the task would be to develop a module on a topic of your choice. And I recommend that the topic that you will be choosing is already based upon the needs and resource assessment activity that you have conducted, or based on the situational analysis of the particular sector that you will be trying to focus on. So the module that you will be developing, the plan, should be containing all of these components: the title, overview, objectives, activity, discussion, input, deepening, synthesis, and evaluation. And once you are done with your module, you can also send these modules to my email. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much for listening to this lecture.